The hall of the Concordance had been built to make small things feel smaller. Its ceiling was not a ceiling at all but a slow river of light, a manufactured aurora bred to remind every delegate who passed beneath it that the species which raised this dome had been folding starlight into architecture, while most of the galaxy was still learning to fear the dark. The floor was a single sheet of grown crystal, flawless, cold, polished by 10,000 years of careful feet. When you stood on it, you could see the chamber repeated beneath you, an upside-down twin of the Great Gathering, so that every delegate seemed to hover between two assemblies, two judgments, two infinities. The Concordance was not a parliament. It was a verdict that never ended. On the highest tier, where the air was thinnest and the light was richest, sat the 17, the permanent voices, the old powers, the species who had been ancient before the galaxy learned the names of the rest. And among the 17, in the chair carved from a single piece of meteoric glass, sat Counselor Thren Vale of the Seedy, who would, before this hour was finished, learn the precise weight of a thing he had spent his entire life believing he understood. He thought he understood fear. He had built a career on it. The Seedy were a long-lived people, patient as glaciers, and Thren Vale was patient even by the standards of his kind. He had governed 3 colony clusters, brokered 4 ceasefires, and presided over more extinctions than he liked to count. Not violently, never violently, the Seedy did not stoop to violence. They simply managed. They identified the species whose curves bent the wrong way, whose appetites outran their wisdom, whose growth threatened the long, slow stability the Concordance had spent eons cultivating, and they managed them down. Quotas, embargoes, quarantines that lasted 1,000 years. The slow closing of doors until a people forgot there had ever been anywhere else to go. It was, Thren Vale had always told himself, a mercy. Better a quiet diminishment than a war. Better to let a species fold gently inward than to watch it burn outward and take 100 others with it. He had voted, 11 days ago, to manage the humans. And now the humans were here, and the humans stood very still in the center of that vast cold floor, beneath that river of borrowed starlight, and she did not look up at the 17 at all. That was the first thing that was wrong. Everyone looked up. Every petitioner, every supplicant, every newly contacted species blinking in the impossible scale of the hall, they all looked up, helplessly, the way a small animal looks up at weather. The architecture demanded it. The light pulled the eyes. To stand beneath the Concordance and not look up was either ignorance or a statement, and the human, Thren Vale was beginning to understand, was not ignorant. She was small, bipedal, soft, wrapped in the dull gray fabric her species favored, the kind of creature that in the old taxonomies would have been logged as pre-significant, warm-blooded, short-lived, evolved from pack predators on a heavy, unremarkable world. Her face was bare. The humans did not armor their faces. They wore them out in the open, every flicker of feeling printed on the skin, which had struck the Seedy as obscene when they first encountered it, a kind of nakedness no civilized species would tolerate. She had a name that the translators rendered as Mara. There was more to it, a long chain of syllables, ancestors and places folded into the sound, but she had given only the one word when she walked in. Mara, as if a single word were sufficient. As if she did not need the weight of her whole lineage to stand in this room. Beside her, on a low repulsor cradle, sat 2 objects under gray cloth. That was the second thing that was wrong, and it gnawed at Thren Vale in a way he could not name. New species, when they came before the Concordance, brought gifts, crystallized music, samples of their finest engineering, living art. The Concordance was, above all, a thing that received tribute, but these 2 shrouded shapes did not look like tribute. They looked like the thing a creature carries when it has already decided how a conversation is going to end and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. The speaker of the day was the Galactic delegate, a being of fused mineral and slow blue fire, and its voice came out of the air everywhere at once. The unaffiliated species human, it intoned, petitions the Concordance for recognition and the rite of passage, the The Concordance has reviewed the assessments. A pause waited. The assessments are not favorable. Thren Vale watched the human's bare face. Nothing moved in it. Your species, the speaker continued, expands beyond sustainable bounds. Your settlements have already breached the Trell quarantine line in 3 sectors. Your internal records, which we have, of course, observed, show no fewer than 240 active armed conflicts among your own kind within a single generation. You wage war on one another for resources, for territory, for belief. You have not unified, you have not stabilized. You have not, in the judgment of this body, demonstrated the maturity required of a member species. The blue fire flickered. The Concordance is prepared to extend the humans a compact of limitation. Your borders will be fixed. Your population will be held to its current ceiling. Your access to the deep lanes will be moderated. In exchange, you will be permitted to continue, to endure quietly. It was the speech Thren Vale had helped write. He recognized the cadences, the careful softenings, moderated, quietly, permitted to endure, the vocabulary of management, the grammar of a slowly closing door. He had spoken these phrases over a dozen worlds and watched a dozen peoples accept them with relief, because the alternative, the thing left unsaid, the thing that lived in the silence after or else, was so much worse. The human did not accept with relief. The human laughed. It was a small sound, more breath than voice, and it should not have carried in that enormous space, but it did, because the hall had been engineered for perfect acoustics, and it betrayed her the way it betrayed everyone, except that no one had ever laughed in the hall of the Concordance, not in living memory, and the sound went out across the crystal floor and up the tiers, and the river of light overhead seemed for a moment to dim. "You've been watching us," Mara said. Her voice was even, tired almost. The voice of someone repeating a thing she has already said many times in smaller rooms. "I want to be sure I understand. You've been watching us for how long?" The speaker did not answer, which was an answer. "Long enough to count our wars," Mara said. "Long enough to read our records. Long enough to know exactly how many of us there are, and where our lines are, and what we believe." She tilted her head, and the gesture traveled up to Thren Vale like a blade turning. "You watched all of that, and the conclusion you reached, the thing all that watching produced, was that we should be held to a ceiling. The humans are aggressive," the speaker said, and now there was the faintest edge in it, the unfamiliar friction of a script gone off its rails. "You cannot deny your own history." "No," Mara agreed. "I can't. We are aggressive. We fight. We've fought each other for as long as we've existed, and I won't stand here and pretend we're gentle because we aren't, and I'm tired of species who have never met us deciding what we are." She paused. "But I want you to sit with something. You watched us for, let's say, a long time. You learned that we fight. And in all that watching, all that counting and reading and measuring, it never once occurred to any of you to ask the obvious question." Silence. "You never asked," Mara said softly, "what a species like us builds when it's afraid." And she reached down and pulled the gray cloth from the first object. "To understand what happened in the hall, you have to go back, not far. 11 years, by human reckoning, which is no time at all to the seedy, and an eternity to the species that measures its days in heartbeats. You have to go back to a woman who was not yet tired." Mara had been an engineer first, before she was anything else. Not a soldier, not a diplomat, those came later, came because they had to. She had grown up in the orbital foundries above a dim red world at the edge of human space, the kind of place where children learn to read pressure gauges before they learn to read words, where the hull was always one bad weld away from the void and everyone knew it. Her mother had been a metallurgist. Her father had run a salvage rig. She had learned, very young, the central truth of her people's existence out there on the rim. Space does not care. It was not cruel. Cruelty would have been a kind of attention. Space simply did not care whether you lived, and it expressed this indifference through 1,000 patient mechanisms: cold, vacuum, radiation, the slow betrayal of metal fatigue, the mathematics of orbits that did not bend to mercy. To be human on the rim was to wake every morning into a universe that had no opinion of you whatsoever and would erase you without noticing if you let your attention slip for 1 second. And so humans had become a species obsessed with one question, the question their whole frantic, violent history kept asking in 1,000 forms. What do we do when the thing that's coming doesn't care about us? They had answers. Most of them were terrible. The first answer was the oldest. When a thing comes at you and does not care, you throw something heavy at it very fast and you let physics do the arguing. A rock, a spear, a bullet, a slug of metal accelerated to a fraction of light speed by magnetic rails longer than a city. The galaxy was full of elegant weapons, particle lances, phase disruptors, fields that unwove matter at the seams. The concordant species had spent their long lives refining energy into ever finer instruments of persuasion, and they had built shields to match, layered defenses that drank energy weapons and grew stronger, that turned light and plasma and exotic radiation into nothing more than a warmth on the hull. But a shield is an argument against energy, and a rock is not an argument. A rock is a fact. Humans had never been able to afford elegant weapons, so they had spent 400 years perfecting the rock. The second answer was newer, and it had cost more, and Mara had been there for the cost. There is a memory she carries that she has never told the concordance about, and never will, and it goes like this. A laboratory deep in a hollowed asteroid, the kind of place humans built when they were doing work they did not entirely trust themselves to do. The Teleportation Project. It had a long official name, and everyone just called it the door. The principle was old, theoretically fold space, punch through, step from here to there without crossing the between. A dozen concordant species had toyed with the idea over the millennia and abandoned it, because the energies were grotesque and the failure modes were worse, and because the older, wiser, longer-lived peoples had reached a sensible conclusion. Some doors should stay closed. Humans did not believe in doors that should stay closed. Humans believed, with the bone-deep conviction of a species that had clawed its way off one dying world after another, that any door could be opened if you were willing to pay enough, and that the only real question was who pays. The early doors had killed people. Mara does not flinch from this when she remembers it, because flinching would be a lie. The first successful human teleportation moved a living subject 11 meters, and the subject arrived, and the subject was wrong in ways that the recordings will never be released and that Mara saw and that live behind her eyes in the bad hours. The second worked. The third worked. The 31st killed a man named Idris who had volunteered, who had a daughter, who had looked at Mara before he stepped onto the pad and said, "If it doesn't work, tell her it was worth it," and it had not worked, and Mara had not been able to tell his daughter any such thing because it was not true. It was not worth it. Nothing was worth that. But the 32nd had worked, and the 400th. And by the time the project was done, humans could step from a foundry on the rim to a research station around a distant star in the time it takes to draw a breath. And they had bought that capability with a number of human lives that the concordance, in all its watching, had never bothered to learn. This is the thing the older species never understood about humanity, the thing that all their measuring missed. They counted human wars and concluded humans were violent. They were right, but they never asked why humans would pour so much blood into a single problem, would burn so many of their own short, precious lives to crack one closed door, and the answer was the thing that should have frightened them most of all. Humans were not building these things to conquer. Humans were building these things because they were terrified, and a terrified human does not run. A terrified human stays up all night in a hollowed asteroid, weeping over the body of a friend, and then wipes its face and goes back to work, because the thing it fears is still out there, and it has not yet built the answer. Mara had been in the room for the rock. She had been in the room for the door. She had buried Idris and 17 others whose names she could recite in her sleep. And when the call came that the Concordance, the great and ancient body that humanity had been so desperate to be welcomed into, the family of the stars, the proof that the long climb had been worth it, when the call came that the Concordance had decided humanity was a problem to be managed, it had not made her angry exactly. It had made her tired. Because she had seen the assessments, eventually. Humans were very good at seeing things they were not meant to see. She had read the language of management, the moderated and the quietly, and underneath the soft words she had found the harder document, the one the Concordance kept beneath the one it showed. The contingency. What the Concordance intended to do if the humans did not accept their fixed borders gracefully. Where the automated suppression platforms had already been positioned. How long to the hour the older species estimated it would take to fold humanity gently and permanently inward, back down to one system, then one world, then memory. She had read the part where Counselor Thren Vale of the Seedy had signed his name to it. And she had thought, standing alone in a quiet room with that document glowing in front of her, a thought that was not rage and was not fear, but was something older and colder and far more human than either. They've never been hit by something that doesn't care about them. Let me introduce them. In the hall, the gray cloth fell away from the first object. It was not impressive. That was the thing the 17 would remember in the long silence afterward, how unimpressive it was. The concordant species made beautiful weapons, weapons that sang, weapons sheathed in light. This was a length of dark metal, scarred and functional, a barrel and a set of rails and a heavy cradle, nothing aesthetic about it at all. It looked like something built in a hurry by people who could not afford beauty, which is exactly what it was. This, Mara said, is the oldest thing we make, older than our cities, older than our writing. If you go back far enough, the first one was a stone in a fist. She rested one hand on the cold metal, almost gentle. It throws a piece of metal very fast, that's all. There's no field, no exotic physics, no energy signature for your sensors to drink. It's a rock the size of my thumb, moving at a speed your minds were never built to fear, because nothing in your long, careful history ever needed to. The speaker's blue fire had gone very still. We have shields, it said, and Thren Vale heard with a small private horror the brittleness in it. The speaker was reassuring itself. We have defenses that have held for 10,000. Your shields stop energy, Mara said. They're very good at it. They're the best in the galaxy, and I mean that. We studied them. They're extraordinary. She paused. But a shield that stops energy is a wall built against fire, and we didn't bring you fire. She looked up then, for the first time. Straight up the tiers, past the lesser delegates, past the river of light, to the meteoric glass chair where Thren Vale sat, as if she had known exactly where he was the entire time, as if she had walked into this impossible room already knowing precisely which of the 17 had signed which document. We brought you a rock, she said, and we walked it through your door. And Thren Vale understood in the half-second before the second cloth fell what the second object was going to be. And it was the first time in 400 years of his long-managed life that he had felt the specific, animal, undignified sensation that the humans, in their crude, bare-faced language, called the floor dropping out. There had been a meeting on the human side before all this. You should know about it because it is the heart of the thing, the moral weight the whole story turns on, and the Concordance never saw it and never will. It was not a war council, though it should have been. It was held in a plain room with bad lighting and worse coffee, and there were 11 humans in it, and they were arguing because that is what humans do, that is the thing the older species mistook for weakness. Some of them wanted to fight. The platforms the Concordance had positioned were automated, vulnerable, unmonitored. The older species were so confident in their secrecy that they had not even properly guarded them. With the rock and the door together, Humanity could have walked a kinetic round through the heart of every suppression platform in a single coordinated hour, and then walked the same trick into the hall of the Concordance itself, and ended the conversation permanently. The older species had never imagined a weapon that could not be shielded against, married to a delivery system that could not be intercepted, in the hands of a people angry enough to use it. Humanity could have decapitated the galaxy in an afternoon. There were humans in that plane room who wanted to. Mara understood them. She had buried Idris too. She knew the precise temperature of the rage that says they were going to erase us, so erase them first. Do unto others before they do unto you. It's the oldest law there is, and it's kept us alive this whole long climb. She had felt it. She felt it still, some nights. And there were humans who said no. Not because they were gentle. Mara wants this understood, will always want this understood. The humans who argued for restraint in that plain, ugly room were not gentle people. They were the most frightening people there. They were the ones who had looked all the way down into the thing humanity had built and understood, with total clarity, exactly what it meant. That humanity now held in its hands the power to do to the Concordance precisely what the Concordance had quietly done to a dozen species before: the slow folding inward, the closing of doors, the management. And they had asked the question that no other species in that great galactic family had ever had to ask, because no other species had ever held this particular kind of power and the particular kind of fear that built it. If we do this, what do we become? The old law said, do it first. The old law had kept humanity alive across 400 years and 1,000 graves. The old law was written in every cell of them. The predator's law, the rim dweller's law, space does not care, so you had better. And in that plane room, 11 exhausted humans had voted, by the narrowest margin, to break the oldest law their species had. They would not strike first. They would not decapitate the galaxy. They would not become the thing that had decided to manage them because, and this was the argument that won, this was Mara standing up in that bad light and saying it with her voice cracking, because we are not what they think we are, and the only way to prove it is to not become it. Instead, they would show them. They would walk into the hall, and they would demonstrate, undeniably, that humanity could have ended everything and chose not to. They would put the rock and the door on the floor of the Concordance and let the older species do the arithmetic themselves, in the privacy of their own ancient minds, and arrive at the number, the casualty number, their casualty number, and then look at the small bare-faced creature who had walked it into their sanctum and not used it. It was the most dangerous thing a species can do. It is far easier to destroy an enemy than to leave them alive holding the certain knowledge that you could have destroyed them and didn't. Mercy is a debt the merciful can never collect and the spared can never forgive. Mara knew this. They all knew this. They did it anyway. Because they were tired of being measured by their wars. And they wanted, just once, to be measured by their restraint. The second cloth fell. It was a frame. A simple frame, a ring of the same scarred dark metal, perhaps 3 meters across, mounted on the repulsor cradle, and within the ring there was a discontinuity, a wrongness, a place where the perfect crystal floor of the hall and its perfect upside-down twin were both visible through the ring but shifted, doubled, as if the ring were a window looking onto a place that was also this place but not. The door. You said you'd been watching us, Mara said, and her voice in the enormous silence was almost conversational now, almost kind, which was the most terrible register of all. I believe you. You watch everyone. It's how you manage. You see the curves bend the wrong way, and you close the doors before anyone notices the doors were ever open. She looked around the tiers, at the 17, at the lesser delegates frozen in their 100 shapes. You're very good at it. You've been doing it for 10,000 years, and most of the galaxy doesn't even know it's happening. The species you've managed don't hate you. That's the genius of it. They just got smaller and quieter and forgot there'd ever been anywhere else to go, and they thanked you for the protection. She rested her hand on the ring. But here's the thing about being watched, she said. We've known for a while, we read your contingency. We know where your platforms are. A pause, and Thren Vale felt it coming the way you feel a held breath in another's chest. We know your names, the ones who signed it. She did not say his. She did not have to. She had already looked at him once, and that had been enough, and the not saying was worse than any saying could have been. So before I came here, Mara said, I want you to understand what I could have done. Not as a threat. The threat would be the easy part. I want you to understand it because I think you've forgotten. I think you forgot a long time ago what it costs to not do a thing you have every reason and every power to do. She lifted her hand from the ring. And through it, in the discontinuity, the doubled image resolved for one instant into clarity, and every delegate in the hall saw what lay on the other side of that small dark door. It was one of their suppression platforms, the automated ones, the secret ones, floating in the deep dark where it had been hidden, where it was meant to wait, patient as the seedy themselves, for the order to begin folding humanity inward. And it was here. It was on the other side of a ring of scarred human metal standing on the floor of the Concordance. Humans had opened a door to it. Humans had been standing inside it. Humans could have, at any moment in the long minutes Mara had been speaking, walked a thumb-sized rock through that ring at a speed nothing in the galaxy could shield against, and the platform would have ceased to exist. And then the next one, and then the one after that, and then this hall, and then the 17, and then everything. The door had been open the entire time. The door had been open before she ever began to speak. And nothing had come through it. That was the moment the Galactic Council fell silent. Not at the rock they might have rationalized, might have dismissed as a crude trick. Not even at the door alone. They fell silent at the conjunction, at the terrible simple arithmetic of the two things together, the unshieldable weapon and the uninterceptable door, and the soft, bare-faced creature standing between them who had held that conjunction in her two hands for the length of an entire conversation, and had not closed it on them. There was no sound in the hall of the Concordance. The river of light slid overhead, indifferent, beautiful, borrowed. 10,000 years of careful management hung in the air like a held breath. And the older species, the ancient ones, the long-lived ones, the ones who had measured humanity and found it wanting, discovered all at once and all together that they had been measuring the wrong thing. They had counted the wars. They had never thought to weigh the restraint. Thren Vale was the first to break. It was not supposed to be him. The seedy were the most composed of all the 17, glacial, unreadable. It was a point of pride. But Thren Vale had signed the document, and the human had looked at him, and now he was on his feet, which no counselor did. One did not stand in the hall, the architecture forbade it, and he was standing, and his long pale frame was shaking in a way he could not control. Why, he said. His translated voice came out cracked and strange. Why didn't you? And he could not finish it, because to finish it was to say the thing aloud, to admit before the entire Concordance that he had expected to be destroyed, that he had known he deserved to be, that the small creature on the floor had held his death and the death of everything in her hands, and he could not understand why he was still alive. Mara looked up at him, and the thing in her bare face was not triumph. He had braced for triumph. He could have borne triumph. What he saw instead, printed openly on that naked human skin in a way no civilized species would ever have allowed, was grief. Because of Idris, she said. He did not know the name. None of them did. It meant nothing to the Concordance, would never appear in any assessment, was not a war or a border or a number on a curve. He's one of ours, Mara said. One of the ones it cost. We built this, she touched the ring, the rock, both, and it cost us. More than you'll ever bother to count because you only count the wars. You never counted what we spent. You looked at us killing each other and you never once asked what we'd give to stop dying, to stop being the thing that space erases without noticing. Her voice did not rise. It got quieter and the quiet carried. We didn't build the door to conquer you. We built it because we were afraid, and we are always afraid, every single one of us, every day of our short, stupid lives, and we have to decide every single day what to do with that fear. And most days we get it wrong. We start wars. We hurt each other. We are exactly as bad as your assessment says. I won't pretend we're not. She gestured at the open door, at the platform hanging in the dark on the far side of it, at the unfired rock. But sometimes, she said, we get it right. And the way you can tell humanity got it right is by the things we didn't do, and you'll never see those, because they don't leave a mark, because the rock that doesn't get fired and the door that closes again gently don't show up in any record you keep. She looked at him, at all of them. You've been watching us for so long, and you only ever learned half of what we are. You learned the half that frightens you. You never once learned the half that should make you ashamed of how you plan to use the first half against us. She bent. She picked up the cloth from the floor. And this was the part that Thren Vale would think about for the rest of his very long life, the gesture that would not leave him. She draped it back over the ring, gently, the way you would cover something sleeping, and the door's discontinuity faded, and the platform on the far side vanished, and the most dangerous conjunction of technologies in the history of the galaxy went quietly back to sleep under a piece of gray cloth on the floor of the hall. We're not asking to be recognized anymore, Mara said. I came here to ask for that. I'm not going to. You don't get to recognize us. We were always real with or without your permission, the same way space was always cold and the rock was always going to fall. She straightened. I came here to tell you we know what you decided, and to show you we could answer it, and to let you watch us not. She turned to leave. And the hall, the great hall of the Concordance, built to make small things feel small, 10,000 years of management hanging silent in its borrowed light, the hall did not stop her. Here is the part the histories argue about, on both sides, human and otherwise, and will argue about for as long as either species keeps histories. Thren Vale followed her out. It was unthinkable. A counselor of the 17 did not chase a petitioner down the long approach corridor of the Concordance like a human, like a creature ruled by the feeling printed naked on its face. But he did. His long legs carried him past the frozen delegates and out beneath the great arch and into the corridor where the manufactured aurora thinned to a colder, more honest light, and he caught her, and he said her name, the single word she had offered. Mara. She stopped. She did not turn. I signed it, he said. He did not know why he was saying it. The CD did not confess. Confession was a human grotesquerie, the spilling of an interior that ought to stay private. But it came out of him anyway, his face. He had no face like hers, no naked skin to betray him, but his voice betrayed him instead. The contingency. I signed it. I argued for it. I told them it was a mercy. I told them it was better to fold you down quietly than to wait for you to burn outward and take others with you. I believed it. I have believed it about a dozen worlds, and I was. He stopped. You were right about every one of them, Mara said, still not turning. That's the thing you can't stand, isn't it? You were probably right. You looked at the curves and they bent the wrong way, and you closed the doors and a dozen species got smaller and quieter and nobody burned. By your arithmetic you saved 100 worlds for everyone you managed down. I read your numbers. They're good numbers. Then why, he said, and there it was again, the question he could not finish in the hall. Why does it feel like that? She turned, finally. The grief was still on her face, but there was something else under it now, something that he would spend a long time trying to name and would eventually settle on calling recognition. The look of one frightened creature seeing the fear in another and choosing, for one moment, not to use it. It feels like that because the numbers were never the whole thing. They were the half you could measure. There's another half and it doesn't go on a curve, and you stopped looking at it so long ago you forgot it was there. We almost forgot it too. We voted on it 11 days ago. It was close. It's always close. She paused. The half you forgot is the part where the species you fold down were real. We're afraid. We're doing their best with the fear, the same as everyone, the same as you. And every door you closed, gently, for the best of reasons, was a door someone was on the other side of. And you came here to close one on us, Threnvale said. It was not a question. And you opened it, and you stood inside it. And you. And we didn't, Mara said. Yeah, because somebody has to stop somewhere sometime in the whole long history of frightened things doing terrible arithmetic to each other. Somebody has to be the ones who could have and didn't. We figured it might as well be us. God knows we owe the universe a few. Something flickered across her face that might, on a less tired person, have been the beginning of a smile. Consider it the first installment. She walked away from him then, down the long corridor, toward the lock and the ship and the dim red world on the rim where the foundries turned, and the children learned pressure gauges before words. And Threnvale of the Seedy stood in the cold, honest light of the corridor and watched her go, and did not stop her, and understood at last the precise weight of the thing he had spent his whole life believing he understood. It was not fear. He had built his career on fear, on the management of it, on the careful closing of doors against the things that frightened him. He had thought fear was the heaviest thing a creature could carry. He had been wrong. There was something heavier. It was the thing the small, bare-faced creature had carried into the hall and carried out again unused, the thing she had named with a word, Idris, that meant nothing to him and everything to her, the thing that does not go on any curve. It was the weight of a door you could have closed, and chose to leave open. And he had spent 10,000 years, too sure of his own arithmetic to ever feel it. The Concordance did not extend humanity a compact of limitation. They could not, of course. The entire logic of management depends on the managed species not knowing the door is closing, and humanity had walked through that secret door and laid it bare on the public floor. You cannot quietly fold a people inward once they have demonstrated they could fold you. The contingency platforms were quietly recalled. The Concordance was nothing if not capable of changing a policy without ever admitting it had held the old one. The assessments were revised. The word that had been used for humanity in the secret documents, the one the translators rendered as manageable, was struck through and replaced, eventually, after long argument, with a word that has no clean human equivalent but means something like those who stop. Humanity got its recognition. It is the great irony of the whole affair, and Mara never let anyone celebrate it because she understood the price. They got everything they had come to ask for, and got it precisely because they stopped asking. The galaxy welcomed them not because they had proven they were gentle, they hadn't, they weren't, but because they had proven the one thing the older species had never had to prove about themselves and could no longer be sure of. That a people with the power to do the terrible arithmetic could choose, even once, even narrowly, even with their dead unburied behind them, not to. It changed the Concordance, slowly, the way humans change, which is to say grudgingly, incompletely, 2 steps forward and a war back. But it changed. There are species alive today, small, quiet, folded-down species that the Seedy had managed centuries before, who have begun, carefully, tentatively, to find their doors unlocked again. No one announced it. The Concordance does not announce its mercies any more than it announced its cruelties. But the doors are opening here and there, across the long, slow galaxy. And if you ask the older species why, they will give you good numbers and reasonable arguments, and not one of them will mention a small, bare-faced creature standing inside a ring of scarred metal on the floor of the hall, holding the end of the world in her 2 hands, choosing to set it down. They don't mention it, but they remember it. That is the difference between the galaxy before and the galaxy after, not a treaty, not a technology, not a balance of power. A memory. The memory of the hour the Concordance fell silent and learned, far too late, to weigh the restraint as well as the wars. There is an ending to Mara's story, and it is quiet, and most accounts leave it out because it does not fit the shape of the legend. She did not become a hero. Humans are bad at letting their dangerous people become heroes. Some old instinct warns them off it, and rightly. She went home. She went back to the dim red world and the foundries, and she did not run the door project anymore. She could not. The bad hours had grown too long, and she took up smaller work, repair and maintenance, the patient, unglamorous labor of keeping the hull one weld further from the void. But once a year, on a date that means nothing to the Concordance, she goes to a small gray memorial on the rim where the names are written, the 18 who died building the door, and she reads them, all of them, out loud, because she promised herself she would never let them become a number. And the first name she reads is Idris, and after his name she says the thing she could not say to his daughter 11 years ago, the thing that was not true then and that she has spent her whole life trying to make true since. It was worth it. Not because of the recognition, not because of the changed assessments or the opening doors, but because of what humanity did with the thing his death helped build, because they took the most terrible power any species had ever held, the unshieldable rock and the uninterceptable door, the stone and the gate, the two oldest dreams of a frightened animal, and they walked it into the heart of the galaxy and set it down. That is the human story, the one the older species are still learning to tell. Not that humanity was strong. Everyone is strong, given enough fear and enough time. The galaxy is full of strength. Strength is the cheapest thing there is. The human story is that humanity was strong, and afraid and grieving and angry enough to be right about it, and chose, by the narrowest of margins, on the closest of votes, with its dead still warm behind it, to leave the door open. The Concordance had spent 10,000 years closing doors. It took a species they had written off as primitive, a species of pack predators from a heavy, unremarkable world, a species that warred and bled and built terrible things out of terror, to remind the whole ancient, careful galaxy of the one thing it had forgotten, that the measure of a people is not what they build to throw at the dark. It is what they hold, fully able to throw it and choose not to. The rock was a fact, the door was a door. And the silence in the hall, that long unbroken silence where 10,000 years of certainty came quietly apart, that silence belonged, in the end, to neither the weapon nor the gate. It belonged to the hand that stayed open.